What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Anders Odden of Cadaver. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. Again, nothing is more metal than talking with Cadaver in the heart of a quarantine zone during this pandemic, so thank you.
Yeah, the post-apocalyptic scenario is everywhere, right?
Yep. We're going to get some of the best metal albums ever from this. I just know it.
Oh yeah, that's a good thing about this is that, for musicians, this is actually what we like to do, to just be in our, confined space and make new music. So I guess, everybody now experience what we normally think is good.
Yeah, definitely. So the new Cadaver record is Eder and Bile, which is scheduled to come out in 2021. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first Cadaver record since Necrosis came out in 2004, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so not to make you feel old, but I was still in elementary school when the last Cadaver record came out, and now I'm 26. So,
Okay.
Now, could this new single that you released, DGAF, serve as like a clear representation of what the whole album is going to sound like, or is this just the beginning in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's all different, songwriting and styles, but I mean, definitely the energy and the way we recorded it is definitely where we want everything to be, so it's a good indication of everything we're doing on the album, for sure.
Okay. Being that it was the first record and, since 2004, do you consider this just a follow-up to Necrosis, or do you think that this is kind of like a fresh, brand new beginning for Cadaver?
It's actually what I did when I started to write songs for this album was I went back to my first two albums from the 90s and learned myself how to play all the 23 or 4 songs we did back then. So I kind of took up on myself to become my younger inspiration and figure out kind of where I was heading as a songwriter in the beginning of my career, and so spun out of what I was doing now in context to my younger self. So taking inspiration from the early days of my own creation really sparked me into this new direction, which now feels like maybe that's why it feels fresh, because I'm inspired by somebody who was like 17, 18, 19 years old, and basically that's the best way to, express what we try to do now.
Yeah, and so is it going to maybe have some similar sounds to what we may have heard back in the day on Hallucinating Anxiety or In Pains?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I tried to kind of make this as the album that was never done between those two. So that was kind of my goal when I was writing for this. And I kind of, it's always concepts in your head, whether that works or not, but it's definitely where I was tapping into when it comes to songwriting and riff style, and it came really naturally together with how I would see this music develop throughout the years, because for me this music is just something that happens in the interaction with especially a drummer, and like the drummer that I used to play with in the 90s, Ole, was a very inspired drummer that could spark, riffs into being just by playing the drums. And the same thing with Dirk is that he just comes up with something and I immediately just jam to what he does. And sometimes that just the energy just makes what we create together in the band now. So that's kind of where we're trying to make all our music, and that's why it should sound inspired and spontaneous.
Yeah, well, you recruited Dirk for this particular album, and obviously people know him from playing in Megadeth, but with his work in Soilwork and his time with Aborted, I'd imagine that he also maybe brought some new stuff to the band as well, right?
Oh yeah, but the thing is that he recruited me too, because the thing is that me and him met when he was sitting in for Frost with the Turk on playing on the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise in 2014. And we learned to, just play music together on the spot there with Dirk on, and then I realized that this guy is a huge Cadaver fan. I didn't realize, I didn't know him, but I got to know him through that week. And at the time I had some demos and stuff lying around, and I just sent him lots of riffs, and he came back with this insane drums and parts, and I was like, wow, maybe you could just, continue and make an album. And he was so eager, so I was like, okay, if this guy really wants to play with me in Cadaver, I must say yes to that, because that opportunity will never come like that again. So he is as much a part of this recreation of Cadaver as I am, really. Without him I wouldn't really do it like this at all. I couldn't. So he's a really, really important part of it.
Yeah, and I'd imagine, because in between Necrosis and now, obviously Dirk played with all of his bands, but you were also playing with Satyricon. You did some work with Magenta, so I'd imagine that being involved in different projects and then working together to kind of develop a rebirth for Cadaver. And in a way, I know you said that there's reminiscence of Hallucinating Anxiety and In Pains and stuff, but there has to be some stuff incorporated on here that we may have never ever heard from Cadaver ever, right?
Oh yeah, of course. You always develop as a writer and what you're getting inspired from. In between those two, also part of my career was to be a live member of Celtic Frost, which was really important for me, getting back to the big circuit with metal band, with a metal band like that, Legacy, and playing all these big festivals and stuff like that was mind blowing, and I learned so much from that too, and also from those guys when it comes to writing and everything you learn in life you bring along with you, so there's always things to pick up from everything, and you get inspired. And I wouldn't make these songs like this back then regardless, and sometimes it's kind of frustrating. You think, why didn't I come up with this 35 years ago, but you just didn't, it just things just develop.
Yeah, well, kind of going, I know we're talking about this to death, but being that Eder and Bile, you said has a lot of reminiscence of the earlier work. Was that kind of a preconceived idea, or maybe was the original idea was, okay, you're obviously a lot more developed as an artist. Dirk is Dirk. I mean, that's all you need to say. So I'd imagine, was there maybe did it kind of just happen that way, or was there a preconceived idea revolving around the whole new album?
Yeah, no, I mean, the key thing for me was just to do things that really sounds inspired and fresh. So regardless, and but also that has that old school feel to it when it comes to tempo changes, and not just being into structures where songs are like mathematical things or whatever. It just all this. Ways of recording now, when you put things into a computer, can make you too confined into what the computer thinks. So I wanted to get rid of the computer and just figure out how to use the energy like we did back in the day. So that's kind of what I mean when I say it's inspired by that time. Actually, the very first song on this album is a remake of a song that never made it to the first Cadaver LP from the very first rehearsal tape in '88, called Into the Outside.
Wow.
So that's I'm taking things from pre Hallucinating Anxiety into this as well. So those riffs on that song would never have been made now. Those are so truly from the 80s. You couldn't really, if I did that, it would sound like something from the 80s, but this is actually written in the 80s, so then it's okay,
Aren't you ever, I'd imagine, though, it's got to be the worst if you release an older song that you wrote a long time ago and you just release it now and it ends up being the biggest hit you ever make. Aren't you worried about that?
No, I'm not. That would be that would be fantastic. We would be like, okay, my 15-year-old self was the genius. Sometimes that's, I don't know. When you're young, you just do things, and sometimes you're right.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So it's I never really think like that, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned like riffs and stuff, but like with your guitar work, do you have like a background in theory, like you know what scale or chord progression you're working off of, or are you more self-taught and you are kind of went against the rules a lot more?
Yeah, no, that kind of have developed a little bit. When I was, uh, I actually went and learned piano lessons when I was like 9, 10, 11. So somewhere inside me, I have score knowledge, but I don't really use score knowledge that much in writing metal. But writing metal is basically just trying to hammer out whatever you feel like on the guitar. So it's more like being able to, have the enough skills to play fast or heavy enough to even emulate those sounds you want to do. Basically, if you have all the techniques necessarily to figure out how to play those riffs will come out. If you can't play, if you can't play guitar in that way, those riffs will never appear. So it's basically more about skills on the instrument than skills on what's correct or not correct when it comes to musical theory and stuff like this. But it's I definitely think about stuff like key changes and tempo changes being flowing naturally, but it's more it's more a reflection of how I write music than I don't sit down and score it all out or map it all out. It's more like
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that explaining to you what you
Definitely. I think
Yeah,
with,
okay.
with the intensity of the music you play, if you try to score it out, it'll look like the best abstract painting ever. So.
Yeah, it's kind of when there is this programs you can go into and really write down what you're doing, like tabs. But to me, to sit down and do that, I tried a few times to do that, to learn other people how to play my stuff. But then I realized if I want to learn another guitarist how to play my riffs, I really have to sit together with him at some point, regardless, to just show him exactly how I'm doing what I'm doing. Because I can show it to you on a video file or write it down, but to really get it right, you need to sit with someone physically and then do all the details, because there's just no way to express all those things in writing, basically.
Yeah. Now, being that you are playing in so many projects between, Cadaver and Magenta and Satyricon and, playing live with Celtic Frost and so many different bands, is there maybe a different mind frame depending on the project that you are playing or writing with, or is there maybe kind of like a usual method behind the mind that applies to everything?
Well, I like to think that it's all kind of a big complex thing that makes sense somehow. I mean, all those things have been coming and going throughout a number of years, so it's not like I'm doing all the things at the same time. I'm kind of devoting time to each and every one of those things, so it's kind of impossible to have multitasking band situations. You need to kind of be in the mind frame of the one project fully enough to really do it well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but another thing is that if you want to do music and you just have one project, most musicians have several projects without even telling people they have, because they need more outlets to basically get rid of stuff from their heads.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah. The more.
Because it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I've just been noticing that a lot, I would say the majority of the musicians who I've interviewed are always in more than one project. They always like plug it towards the end, or they, don't talk about it too much, but it almost seems like that every band member I see on stage has another project that they're involved with.
Yeah, and that goes for even like people in really big bands also do that, It's like, I think it's because partly, like I said, getting off steam, and sometimes you just need to do something else to not be in this this one track mind, or just do. Let's say you have like a band with a big production and everything's always supposed to be big. Sometimes you really want to do something smaller or different, at the same time, because you just don't want to have too much to be set up for you to even play just a show. It's kind of liberating sometimes to downscale and just do smaller stuff, just to be able to not have like 10 people around you or whatever that means. So it's always that's one thing, and the other thing is to do different studio projects and different kinds of music with other collaborations, and there's just so much time you can spend in the world anyway, and if you want to just do one thing perfectly, well, you can do that, but most musicians feed off energy from other musicians in different directions, so to get where you are, you need to diverse and go into mistakes, do you do that too, the things that don't work out, and you learn from everything you do, basically.
Of course. And when you look at the entirety of your catalog, whether it's, from Hallucinating Anxiety to, In Pains to Necrosis off of Cadaver, when you look at, like, songs like One Mind from Magenta, and then when you look at Deep Calleth Upon Deep from Satyricon, like, is it almost kind of like, in a way, like a timeline or like maybe a retrospective or even a self-portrait of who you are at that particular time, in a way?
Yeah, you could probably see it like that, but for me it's I remember different things from different projects, and depending on what we did, and maybe we did a tour or we did a video, or stuff that was important in the studio or the process, or so there's always things attached to it somehow, which is always different. There's moments where, for instance, with that the Satyricon song you talked about now, the Deep Called Up on Deep, the song Deep Called Up on Deep, for instance, I remember when that riff, the first riff was made, and the scenario where we were sitting just jamming that riff, and whenever we play that on like a big festival with like tens of thousands of people jumping around, I can still go back to the moment where just 3 people sit in a studio and just jam something. And that's kind of bizarre,
Yeah, you really watch like the riff or even that song grow up. It is almost kind of like a living organism that you help guide and develop and put out into the world.
And that's kind of weird in a way, that you're able to do things which is so abstract, like music. You can't see it, you can't touch it. It just deliver something, and then people react to it all over the globe, which is bizarre.
Yeah. To
think about.
Yeah. Do you find that the longer you work on a certain song or even on a riff, like, do you find that the longer you work on something, the harder it is to kind of maintain or capture a moment?
Depending, maybe sometimes that's true, but it's I always find it fascinating how to develop things, and when is it done, it's really hard to tell. It's like you have to, when you record something, you have to settle on something, and then later maybe you think, oh, I should have done this a little bit more and this a little bit more, and I always incorporated that into live versions, especially with the Cadaver songs, that I would always have a little bit of freedom inside the arrangement or whatever to express something there and then in the live version or whatever we did, and that's a way to go around what you just said for me. It just means like what I did can also do this and that. Maybe people don't really hear that because it's such small details. Maybe I'm the only one in the whole world knowing that I did something different there and there. It's you never know.
Well, what I find unique is because I'd imagine when you're playing something in the studio, you know, with just you and the band members, versus when you're tracking it in the studio with a producer and a mixer, versus when you're playing the material live in front of an audience. It's almost kind of like a completely different aspect or a completely different side of you in a way as well, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's the same for every musician, I think, because that's what you said there is that, you know, those three things are three different expressions, basically. When you're playing live, some people try to play live as close to what they recorded as possible, which is I've done that, especially with like Satyricon and even Apoptygma, Berserk, and the other bands I've been involved with, where doing the same thing as the record is a key. But then you have, you know, what I said with Cadaver, which I feel is more freedom to express different things at different times. But when I say it like that, I don't mean I like the other better than the next. It's just different ways of expressing things, and both works for me. You know, works to play like orchestrated things, which is supposed to be the same at every moment, but it also works to have more improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, could like playing with one project influence another? Like maybe could we hear some Satyricon influence on the new Cadaver record, or do you try to keep every project you're involved with a completely separate entity?
No, I keep that very separate. I don't think you can, you know, if that's the case, it's more like people read things into things than the reality of it. I think I really do know how Satyr writes his riffs, and a lot of his things is not naturally for me to play on a guitar. So when I'm playing my stuff on the guitar, it's much what's naturally for me to play. And so it's kind of would be strange if I was to play things that sounded like his stuff, really, because it's on guitar quite far away from what I'm doing, really, which is kind of strange. But I learn a lot from we learn from each other, but it's more like he has his voice, I have my voice. That's why I feel like, you know, it's more like those things.
Yeah. And I have one more question for you, and I always save the most difficult one for last. You kind of indirectly answered it, but how do you know when a song is done?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't know if that's something you can answer in one go, because sometimes songs are just set up like it just feels like it has to be this part and that's the song. In metal, it's very usually, you know, the riff structures and all that stuff. But I think if a song is truly a song, it could live in different versions and still be the song. So if you really have made like a very important song for people to relate to, you can play it on different kinds of instruments and it still will be the same song, you know.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's what metal kind of doesn't have, is that songwriter thing. But I think the more this develops and the more songwriting is actually really important to me in metal context. So it's not only about the riffs and everything, but it's kind of. Did you see that? Actually, that's an interesting thing about the Corona time. Did you see that Metallica version of Blackened, where they just jam it like a acoustic, semi-acoustic version? They just released it yesterday or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
That tells you something about your question, because I never ever pictured that song to sound like that. But they clearly had a vision of how to just recreate something they did completely different. It's still the same song, but it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the. I was thinking actually the other day, what if, you know, you played some of these death metal songs in that kind of way? Is that possible? Maybe that's something we could explore now in the quarantine time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm learning "Homage for Satan" by Deicide on piano, and I'm not even exaggerating. That song can be transcribed on piano. It's in the key of E flat, I think, or something like that, or something like that. So,
but you can also do like possibly rhythmical things, which is most riffs are rhythmical, so you could probably just switch things around and just do the rhythmic part and then have like a different melody. I don't know, music is very interesting, so that's why we do it, I guess. You always try to chase something you can't see.
yeah, I feel like art is a living thing, and the artist is just like their humble guide in a way.
Yeah, that's a really very good way to express it. Mm-hmm. Just try to figure out something which is there up for grabs. I think Albert Einstein said that the reason why he loved the music from Mozart was that it was just came naturally together. It seems like he was just taking things from the universe and putting them into context, and sometimes that's what music should feel like. It should be like a cosmic language.
Definitely. And I think classical music, to this day, I've always considered classical music, whether it's Mozart, Bach, or Beethoven, to be like the first real rock stars in a way, with the intensity they incorporated.
Totally. That's where it all comes from. Basically, all the emotions and all the power, and they pretty much had it all set up for us to just tap into. Without those guys, we wouldn't be where we are with anything, I guess.
Definitely. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this discussion. Is there just anything with Cadaver you would like to promote? The new album is scheduled to come out in 2021, Eder and Bile.
Or later this year. We don't know actually yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for my lack of research there.
Well, it's out there on some website, but right now it looks like it's going to happen in 2020, late 2020. So what I really want to tell everybody is that hopefully everybody's staying safe and getting through the post-apocalyptic era, or new gigs happening sometimes down the road, and I really hope that we can see as many people as possible out there on the road again in the future, and play shows and release more music and continue the legacy.
Yeah.
And basically spread the good vibes of death metal.
Yeah. We'll get through this. Metal has been through so much worse. Remember in 2015, after the Paris attacks, and every show was getting canceled in Europe after that, and everything like that. Metal will always prevail. Metal, you can't stop this.
No. We will prevail. It's just that when we're in this dark moment right now, it feels like everything's hopeless, but we all know it's gonna turn and be better at some point.
Yeah, well, darkness is always temporary, and the light is always present. Sometimes it's just farther away. So
that's true. All right.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Anders. Everybody, Anders of Cadaver. New music coming very soon. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we'll see you next time.